Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum. I am your host Faisal Raza Khan and you are watching Foresight. Viewers, International Monetary Fund's Executive Board on September 25th, 2024 approved $7 billion extended fund facility for Pakistan, out of which the first tranche of $1.1 billion likely to be available to Pakistan on 30th September 2024. IMF facility is for 3 years or for 37 months. No doubt that it's a great achievement by the government, but yet again it's the start of a testing times. In the form of IMF bailout, Pakistan got a little breathing space, but the question is that how we will create a real-time space for economy, an economy which is based upon sustainability, completely diversified, vibrant and prosperous. How the key reforms will make fiscal consolidation, debt servicing, the fiscal space available for socio-economic development, tax policy reforms and the taxation system which is fair, easy and accessible to all. Digitalization of whole of the taxation system, growth strategy, energy sector reforms, particularly the generation, distribution and obviously its transmission. How to enhance exports, the trade diversification which is very important to earn more for Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves. Grow the GDP, tone down the inflation and the policy rate to have more investments not only at the local level but the foreign direct investments into the country. To discuss this very important issue, we have in our studios Dr. Neelum Nigar. She is the director at Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Most welcome to you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your time. And with her, Dr. Hidayat Khan. He is the head of Department of Economics at the National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. Most welcome to you, Doctor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And online joining us, Dr. Usman Chohan. He is the advisor on economic affairs to the President Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. Most welcome to you, Dr. Usman. Thank you very much for joining us online. My first question to you, Dr. Neelum, that do you not think that the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's led economic team, the reform process which was started in Pakistan, the Federal Board of Revenue's transformation efforts, the country's diplomacy at the international level like China, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, continuous support has led to the IMF board's approval, while IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva herself acknowledged that Pakistan's successful homegrown reforms led to this program.
Thank you, Raza Sahab. I agree with the introduction that you mentioned in your brief remarks. It is indeed, it was much needed at the time when there was a lot of uncertainty at the ministerial level. And it was the kind of approval that has been given by the International Monetary Fund and the extended facility, the economic extended facility that has been given, has come at a time when it was much needed. As you mentioned, the government has got a breathing space to bring the kind of reforms, the fiscal consolidation, debt reservicing, the tax reforms. These all would come after we have got the approval of the IMF program. As you mentioned, that there is a lot that the government has yet to do, but the approval itself is a success for the government and its ministries, that they have been in a position to get this bailout package, right? But the most of the challenging task is yet to come.
Definitely.
Right? The conditions that they have been given under the program, there's a lot that the government has to do at the country level, particularly in regards to the tax reform, because much of the challenge would come at the tax reform. The target, which is high, obviously high, but it is achievable. It depends on how the government is moving ahead with the kind of reforms that is being given, or that has been given in the reform programs.
Your point well taken. Dr. Hidayat, after the IMF Executive Board's approval, Pakistan got another extended fund facility. Now, what's, as ma'am rightly said, that what are the major areas that needs to be done now urgently to strengthen public finances, reduce the inflation, rebuild the external buffers, remove economic distortion to spur actually the private sector led inclusive and resilient economic growth, including the trade liberalization and diversification, because that is the linchpin really, to attain a strong macroeconomic stability?
Okay, thank you very much. As you have earlier explained that now it has been started, and to move further with this program, first of all we need to have fiscal discipline. By fiscal discipline I mean that the government has to reduce distortive expenditure and it has to expand its revenue. The second thing is our monetary policy. We need to tighten our monetary policy to keep inflation at bay and have an interest rate within the range of 16%. So that will, as it has been mentioned by you, it will provide enabling environment for the economic growth and for the businesses to further expand. The third thing, and which I always quote and wherever I get the opportunity to talk about, is the loss-making state enterprise or state-owned enterprise SOEs.
Yeah, definitely.
The government has to seriously look into that, and related to that is circular debt, which is going out of the control. I think, I don't know, like right now it is within the range of
it is hovering around right now. It's approximately 24 billion. So
yes, so
24
so
billion.
even the IMF wants the government to bring it down to like 24.3 trillion level in the extended financial facility program. So these are the major things. The minor things are that the government has to focus on tax morale.
Definitely.
Which I will explain in the later part.
Yeah, definitely. We have lots of questions on that. You were talking about the debt burden particularly, but we will talk on circular debt later on. But this question is to you both. How can Pakistan effectively manage its burgeoning debt burden totaling over $22 billion? It is huge, really. It is external and domestic as well, because the domestic is huge, and because we are borrowing a lot from the local market. So ensure sustainable debt servicing, how it would be possible, then considering the country's limited foreign exchange reserves, then of course we have substantial annual repayment obligations as well, and already high budget allocation for the interest payments on those loans. Amidst pressing development needs and the economic growth aspirations, because these are left behind most of the time, and we have lots of cuts on PSDPs as well. So Dr. Hidayat, please, if you...
Okay, as you have mentioned that we have like around 220 trillion of...
It's more than that.
Or more than that, both external and internal debt. For taking that huge debt for long, it is almost impossible for a country. Now, what are the ways?
And it is unfortunately piling up.
Yes. What are the ways like we can reduce it, or at least stop the piling up of the growth? The first thing is that, like, again, to focus on your fiscal deficit. And for the fiscal deficit, as I have earlier said, the biggest two sources are circular debt and your state-owned enterprises.
State-owned enterprises.
The second thing is that, like, how you can create the local debt market. When you are creating the local debt market, actually you are avoiding default, which mostly come from the external debt.
Definitely.
And the third and fourth, which are not desirable, but these are short-term remedies. How rationally you are restructuring your debt at the easier terms and condition, at the low rate of interest, and how you are coupling your foreign debt or converting them into grants or supplementing it with the aids. So these are 3-4 areas where the government or the policy maker should take a note of these things and should seriously think to implement those measures.
Definitely, you are absolutely right, ma'am. If you want to say something on that, please.
With regards to the debt burden, that is a big challenge for the country, but let's also admit that taking debt is not an issue. It's how you use that debt. If you are taking loans for writing off the previous loans or for the debt servicing, that is unsustainable for a country. We have seen that even the US has a lot of the number of debts that it owes to China is the highest. But it depends that the loans that you have taken, how are you using them, the proceeds of that debt. Now, how can we deal with it is obviously there are some avenues which the government is already working on it, but can be enhanced more. Like we as a country are vulnerable to climate change.
Definitely.
The climate crisis is there. So there was one debate internationally also that the developing countries who are highly affected by the climate change crisis can use that as a leverage for debt climate swap kind of things, right? So in that case, how that can be used in order to at least write off the already loans that have been taken, considering that the climate change that has impacted our country can be made, the case can be made more effective in order to have a swap of debt to climate. Secondly, there was one discussion in the previous government around sovereign wealth fund, that how a fund can be created that particularly the expenditures which Dr. Hidayat also referred to with regards to the state-owned enterprises expenditures or the challenge of balancing or sustaining the state-owned enterprises. Instead of going all round for privatization of those industries, that can be brought together under the sovereign wealth fund, right, which can be used in order to restructure the kind of debt or loan that is accrued to them. Thirdly, I think there can be one avenues where the government can look in order to deal with the kind of debt that is growing, as Dr. Hidayat also referred to, is there is the Pakistani diaspora which is living in outside the country, the diaspora. The government can issue a kind of bonds, right, to the diaspora at a rate which is attractive to the ones who want to invest and to the government. So there are avenues of having a model of taking debt which is sustainable and which is not a burden on the country. So these are not anything which is out of the box. These are the models that have been used around the world.
Definitely.
So
your point well taken. Your point well taken. Dr. Usman, whether we are at the path of fiscal consolidation with genuine reforms, removing subsidies, privatization of all particularly loss-making state-owned enterprises, to have much needed practical FBR transformation and digitization, the tax equity particularly policy and administrative reforms plug in the loopholes and institutional restructuring. It's not limited to FBR only, but to all related the fiscal and the economic entities which are very much needed regarding smooth our path towards the economic prosperity.
There is a trade-off for the government between political capital and damage or change, upheaval, reform, however you see it. The more that the government tries to reform things, the more there will be vested interests that are upset. So it has to balance that political capital and retain those networks and the goodwill. But at the same time, we all know that the system cannot go the way it has been going. This trade-off means that the government is trying to appease the IMF, take meaningful reform, but at the same time not do so much upheaval because there's a big cost to that for them. So There are state-owned enterprises that are on the chopping block for divestment, for privatization. There are significant tax reforms happening, particularly this non-filer thing being erased, which is a wonderful thing because it's a very artificial construct which doesn't exist anywhere else. There are important ideas being mulled and implemented for restructuring various debt profiles. I'm not talking about the national one, I'm talking about at a subnational level. The These are very serious things that are being considered. At the same time, the global economy is improving, which means, I mean to say that it's slowing down, it's cooling, but it means it's good news for emerging markets in terms of inflation. So it's improving in that sense. And if inflation is coming down, you see more fiscal space, more room, less pressure on the monetary authority, less stress for everybody, for the consumer, which means that there is actually less motivation to continue the same reforms as promised, because there is not the same pressure because of inflation worldwide, because the US is cooling down, China is cooling down, emerging markets are getting breathing room, oil prices are coming down. This means that we have to maintain the motivation to reform in spite of the political costs, as well as the easing monetary environment worldwide. And I think this challenge will be trickier than people realize.
Your point well taken, Dr. Usman. Why not to have rational and realistic tax policies, and why not we be a responsible and punctual taxpayers nation, as Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio grown meagerly to just 9.5% from 8% in 2000. That is a fractional increase of 1.5%, which is projected to rise to at least 11.2% of the GDP during the fiscal year, the current fiscal year of 24-25. So, while in comparison to India, the tax to GDP ratio is increased to 18.5% from 13.4%, and in Nepal it's 17.5% from 8.7% in the same period from at least from 2000. So, huge difference. How we are going to attain our objectives now?
Absolutely right that the tax to GDP ratio is very low. This has two parts. One is better taxation architecture, and the second is to have less expenditure, because you tax to spend, and our expenditures are really something much more important than taxation, to be honest. On the taxation side, as you ask, there are some principles of taxation which are very important to keep in mind, which we don't have to an adequate degree. The first is simplicity. We need a simple tax system. It's not simple enough. It's very complex to deal with. And if we're bringing in these non-filers by force, we better have a simple system to deal with. Equity, certainty, and that's a very scary one, because there isn't much certainty in terms of what new measures are going to be implemented on an ad hoc basis to tyrannize some people, but not all sectors of the economy, which goes to the fairness part. There's not enough fairness in the system. There are sectors which are exempt, which really have to be brought in, given their size of the GDP, their labor employment status versus their tax effort. It has to be efficient. So we expect the FBR to deal with 250 million people. I don't think that is fair. I think that there's local government and provincial structures that should be doing much more, whether through property tax or the goods and services bifurcation we have. We need to have diversity in this also, which is the same point as having the sectors that are not in it. And we need transparency in terms of how taxes are being used and for what reason. When you have these principles put into place, you will see far more tax morale, far more tax effort, and you will see that the taxation that is done, even if it's not at the optimal level, is already doing a good job as long as these principles are in place.
Obviously, your point well taken and well described, really. Dr. Neelum, as Dr. Chohan said, why not tax return filing and the paying tax be made digital, simple, fair, and accessible to all, bringing retailers, the real estate, traders, exporters, agriculturists, industrialists, and others into the digital tax system I'm talking about, rather burdening the already burdened, imposing countless indirect taxes, and whether this you were earlier mentioning that 12.97 trillion rupees tax target would be achievable. So how it is going to be, because it's 40% increase from the previous financial year target.
I agree, it is quite an uphill task. Increasing by 40% of the tax from the previous year, achieving over 12 trillion rupees of tax in one fiscal year is quite a challenging task. But as I said, the government needs to prioritize how it is going to do that, because now there is no option that you can't do that.
Definitely.
Right? You are under the IMF program, and under the program you have given your consent that these are the areas that the government has to work on. Now, when we look at how the regions, as you mentioned and Dr. Chohan also mentioned, that in the region, if India can do that, if Nepal can do that, why is it a problem for the government of Pakistan that we cannot even bring it up to
Even the rest of the South Asian countries are more vibrant than Pakistan right now, unfortunately.
So it
but
is
we
even
can do
less.
it.
Yeah, it
we
is
can
less
do it.
than
We have the potential
10%.
to do it.
It is hardly 9%, and you have to bring it up to at least 13%.
Obviously,
right?
obviously, yes.
Now, for that, I think there are certain measures that the government can take, taking examples from the best practices from around the world, right?
Obviously.
One is, as Dr. Chohan also mentioned, that you need to really simplify the overall tax structure. It is not a simple tax structure. Just filing your tax return, for me even is very difficult, let alone for an ordinary person, for an informal worker.
It's
for
difficult for the highly qualified person as well.
Difficult.
It is not easy for a
not
common
easy.
person.
Yeah.
Why not to have just an app at your mobile,
Yes.
and you are just picking it,
That is
and you are
basically-
just typing it, and for the in 5 minutes you are filing
You
the
are
return.
filing that, and that is like you live in an AI powered world.
Definitely,
So
definitely.
you can have a real data of people, what they are purchasing.
And when the fintech is available.
And the fintech is available. There are many other digital avenues. You can use them, and you can even have real data of what people are, what is their source of income, on what they are having their expenditure. You can have a flow of
And that's what rightly the Prime Minister is saying.
Yes.
And he is stressing hard, even in the previous government also, he has started this digitalization process.
And with that, I'll just add to that, you need to incentivize the retailers,
yes.
because as frequently as I go and ask them to do through my card, they say that we cannot take cash. Why? Because there are certain disincentives for the retailers.
Because we
right?
cannot extract the
In
taxes
order
through the stick system
Yes,
only.
in order to make your economy a cashless economy, you
Obviously,
have to give incentives. You have to give certain incentives to the retailers, to the informal worker, in order to expand your tax
Obviously.
base.
Dr. Hidayat, we have actually run short of time, so we have to be very brief on that. What's your analysis on abolishing the non-filers tax category and imposing strict restrictions on the tax evaders, like ban on international travel accounts, opening purchase of assets, including now introducing a new family status as well in income tax law to protect families, overseas Pakistanis to remain at the active taxpayers list. Income category of rupees 600,000 per annum would be also protected, while they don't have to need to file the tax returns, while people above 65 years of age will declare real market value of their assets for future transactions. So how do you see that?
Okay, as
in brief.
Yeah, as it has been mentioned by Dr. Chohan, like for a country to get enough taxes, there should be a tax morale.
Obviously.
And the tax morale is actually related to a number of things. And if a country is providing, or if the system in itself is providing scapeways to the people who want to evade the tax or who don't want to pay the tax, like non-filer status. So the people will most definitely be using that. The second thing is that, like for overseas Pakistanis, active taxpayers, earlier in our tax laws, if you are abroad, you are not supposed to file any tax or pay any kind of tax. So this is a good initiative. About the 600,000, unfortunately, the person, the moment he is crossing from 600 to 601, he comes under the tax net, and keeping in view current inflation and current your monthly budget, it is very unfair. So the government has to look, and for more than for senior citizens to have the real market value of their asset, it is a good measure. I agree with that and I support it. But the problem is that who will determine the fair market?
Definitely. This is the right question.
Yeah, and like how we can deviate and play around with the fair market prices. So again, I will come back to the point that there should be simple system, there should be equity, and the person should know, the taxpayer should know the tax which I am paying, it is spent on me or the other people living in my country who deserve to be
Definitely,
spent.
you are absolutely right. Madam Neelum, 18th amendment, in line with that, federal and provincial governments agreed to rebalance spendings through National Fiscal Pact, especially to increase the provincial tax collection like sales tax on services and agri income tax, while federal government has to devolve education spendings, the health, social protection and regional public infrastructure investments to the provinces. So how do you see this process, and particularly at which juncture we are right now?
Under the 18th amendment, there were certain services, as you mentioned, that sectors that were devolved to the provinces.
Yes.
And the kind of service sector was already was being devolved to the provinces. Now again, when you look at the overall structure at the federal level, you see there is a lot of things which are not easy to understand, not only for the filers with regards to the tax, be it the property tax or be it the other forms of tax. You cannot expect that things would be smooth at the provincial level.
Obviously.
Right? It's not easy. And the kind of tax machinery, the kind of institutional structure that you have both at the federal level and at the provincial level, it is not easy to get the kind of responses from both the sides. So I think it is good that you have to devolve, but the collection at the provincial level is still not very high. Particularly with regards to when we talk about Sindh, there are certain things that the collection is high, but again it comes to the point that when there is in the pool of NFC, what is your contribution as a province to the pool of NFC, and how come it comes to the provinces whenever there is a need for that. So that tussle is there between the federal and the provincial level. That needs to be dissolved or resolved first in order to bring a smooth taxation system across the country.
Means we have to do a lot on that aspect as well.
We have the tax structure, as said, is not in a smooth shape both at the federal level as a level.
We have to work really hard on that.
Really
Dr. Hidayat, how important the provincial harmonization of their agri-income tax regimes through legislative changes compatible with the federal and corporate income tax regimes, would it be effective from the January 1st, 2025 as envisaged, and whether provinces are committed to it?
Well, that's a very difficult question, I will say. Actually, as it has been mentioned that certain sectors of economy has been devolved to the provinces under 18th amendment, and the provinces also had an NFP, National Financial Pact, and have expressed their commitment under the new IMF program that they will implement this program by the given deadline. Unfortunately, as it has been mentioned earlier, that we don't have the mechanism or we don't have the right infrastructure or machinery for implementing that, and there are still a number of problems under NFC which are still unresolved, like KP. Most of the time they are fighting for their royalties of power generation. The Sindh is fighting for some other thing. The Balochistan is fighting for their royalty of natural gases and natural resources. So for harmonizing between the federal government and the provincial government, the federal government has to ensure the provincial government that if you are getting more from agriculture tax or other provincial tax, you will get a fair chunk of that. If they are given incentives that okay, by putting the effort to increase it another way, you are getting more money into your kitty, then that is one of the possibilities.
Definitely, you have to harmonize it at the national level.
Yeah.
And if you are getting it from the provinces, you must have to create some sort of a space where you give some sort of a return to
Yes,
them
bargaining
and
power.
incentivize that.
Yes,
so
they-
that no doubt about that. You are absolutely right on that aspect. Dr. Usman, another toughest condition is regarding the special economic zones and the export processing zones within the IMF framework. So, on the contrary, unemployment rate actually shoot up to 10.3%, poverty grew up to 40%, while we need industrial base, value-added products for exports, must have export diversification and foreign direct investment inflows inevitable to build overall foreign exchange reserves and the fiscal space. So how it would be possible under such a tough condition, which Prime Minister rightly said that there are lots of tough conditions in that, but we have to bear it because we have to build our economy.
It's a fair point that our unemployment is rising and that an industrial base needs to be restored. But special economic zones are by their very nature discriminatory because they're special zones. You bring special incentives or something of that sort to that zone, which means that all of the industry and business outside of the zone is getting less favorable treatment. That's why it is better not to have, according to the IMF's logic, which makes sense also, that rather than having specialized zones with preferential and distortionary arrangements, you should have a mainstream system where it's a level playing field and the industry that exists outside is not given a disfavorable chance. The point is that special economic zones emerged from a specific context. It was in the transition from China's Maoist structure to its Deng Xiaoping structure that it first experimented on the coast with special zones to transition to a new model. We don't have a new model to transition to. We just got to fix what we have as a model, which means that you should not be disfavoring your existing industrialists, businessmen, by excluding them and having something special on the side.
Your point well taken. Dr. Usman, how do you see the recent Asian Development Bank's report, which suggests that Pakistan's projected GDP growth will remain around 2.8%. IMF projected it 2.5%. State Bank says it will remain between 2.5 to 3.5%, and budgetary expectation was 3.6%, while State Bank says the inflation would be 11.5%, and Asian Development Bank says it's 15% due to heavy income and sales tax rates, higher energy costs, subsidies removal and agri support price removal actually, and tariff adjustment, and resultantly the agriculture and the industrial growth would also suffer. So that's why the inflation could be 15%. So how do you see these figures from ADB, State Bank of Pakistan and the budgetary estimates?
Absolutely, you're right. The ADB has given a different analysis from the IMF. The ADB works independently from the IMF, and we are one of the founding members of the ADB in 1966, and we have close cooperation with the ADB ever since. Now, the ADB's projection of 2.8% is better than the IMF's, and they point to certain risk factors in this GDP figure not being higher, which are basically impositions of what the IMF has put, like they're consequences of what the IMF is making Pakistan do. So it's a different view. And I think that actually both projections, IMF and ADB projections, are probably not as accurate as what the State Bank is projecting, because inflation is coming down much faster than these agencies expected. Inflation reading in this month was 9.6, which is far below the trend of the last 2 years. And you see the State Bank reducing the interest rate because of that. I actually think they should reduce it more aggressively, because we have to get business started again and we have to start promoting growth rather than austerity. So
yeah,
I
Dr.
think
Usman,
that
your point well taken. We have run short of time. Dr. Hidayat, What about the circular debt, which the IMF actually limited it to 2.31 trillion, while unfortunately that is crossing 2.4 trillion. So, and then why not to have robust power sector reforms that is needed, because why not we focus on the clean energy mix so that we reduce our import bill related to oil and other products. We have environment friendly atmosphere as well, the growth for industry, a low cost of doing business and all that.
Okay. When we look at our power structure, like we have 4 different tiers.
Very brief, because we have run short of time. So.
We have generation, we have distribution, we have NPDC. So, circular debt come at different stages, at production, at distribution, and even some of the other channels are also contributing to circular debt. If we can reduce the circular debt, I will cut it very short. We can increase our GDP growth from 1 to 2%.
Obviously.
We can increase our employment. We can create even 100 to 200,000 jobs. We can push our industrial growth from 10 to 15% because of lowering our cost of production. So, our circular debt is actually choking our economic growth, or it has choked us from the neck. The second thing is like cross subsidies in our energy sector, which are actually mistargeting our resources and taking the resources to those who don't deserve them.
Definitely.
So we need to have a targeted subsidy system to curtail.
That's what the IMF is saying actually.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Dr. Hidayat, for your presence here in the studios. Thank you very much, Dr. Neelum, and thank you very much, Dr. Usman, for joining us online. Viewers, as you have just listened to our panelists, we have to focus on debt retirement, the curtailing the government expenditures, particularly the state-owned enterprises privatization or change of the management or restructuring it. We have to focus on restructuring of debt as well, and converting it into the grant or aid. We have to focus on that. Creating fiscal space, particularly we have to curtail the circular debt. This is very important because we are again crossing the limits. Debt to climate fund swap would also be another option, then the sovereign wealth fund as well. Government can issue bonds for the overseas Pakistanis to have accumulative fiscal space for Pakistan. Then the global market is actually easing. The oil prices, the food prices and commodities are going down. So this is the time, this is the space where we can build our economy. Abolishing the non-filers category is very encouraging. Family tax is also. The taxation system must have to be very simple, and return filing must have to be very simple. So it should be digitalized, it must be digitalized. We have to build the industrial base, we have to have the broaden diversified exports and enhance our trade volume. So this is all that we have to do it. IMF program, we got it for 3 years, but we have to focus to build our economy. This is all from today's Foresight. It's time to sign off. Allah.